Hi everyone, my name's Ellen Sassaman. I'm doing part 2 of the assignment today, and we are talking about neurocognitive disorders specifically due to traumatic brain injury. So in part 2, we had to do an article summary. So I picked the article about neurocognitive predictors of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms in children 6 months after the traumatic brain injury. So basically, this study was done in Australia and they picked 166 eligible people, narrowed down from 777. They had to be ages 6 to 14, had a closed head, TBI, alteration of consciousness, and the injury severity was measured by the Glasgow Coma Scale at admission. And then the PTSD scale was done afterwards, as well as a full scale IQ, a selective attention study, a sustained attention study, working memory study, verbal learning, and processing speed measures were used. So basically, the study found that TBI and PTSD are actually really linked together, and that TBI, like when you have a traumatic brain injury, especially as a child, it can actually be a predictor for PTSD symptoms later in life. And they found that the worst post-injury outcomes were when the client was a female, as well as a younger age at injury, and as well as injury severity. So obviously, if your injury is more severe, you're going to be more at risk for PTSD. Then it actually built on other studies around, and they favored what the studies came up with, that more severe head trauma would lead to future PTSD symptoms, as well as younger age of brain injury would be a predictor of PTSD. They also found that younger children have less neurocognitive resources like coping skills to adapt to injuries like traumatic brain injuries. So they don't really know how to deal with everything that comes from a traumatic brain injury. And then that can lead to PTSD symptoms. They also found that memory loss deficits could actually predict less PTSD symptoms. So if the person didn't really remember what actually happened to them, the less you're likely to have PTSD, which I feel like is kind of makes sense. Then just some list of some resources. The first one, these are all links, so you can click on them and check them out yourself. The first one is provided by VCU, and it includes different articles and frequently asked questions for caregivers, as well as people who have a traumatic brain injury. And there's a little chat forum, which I thought was pretty cool, to ask questions, but they always say, ask your doctor as well if you have more medical questions. These are more social type of things. Then the second one, I thought this one was really interesting. It's an interactive map of all the local resources for people with traumatic brain injuries and their caregivers. So it basically just presents a map. You click on what state you're in, what state you need the resources in, and there's like a ton, like a list of a ton of them. Then the third one here offers resources to gain supports for people with traumatic brain injuries, as well as some alternative medicine links, which I thought was pretty interesting because of, the recent up and coming medical marijuana thing. That's kind of like an alternative medicine, and a lot of people are really interested in that, especially for like tremors and Alzheimer's stuff. And, there was some resources for returning to school, and since my article was about children with traumatic brain injuries, I thought that was interesting too, because there was a link for like colleges, like returning to college, and so I thought that was just interesting to include. And then finally, the fourth one, more geared towards caregivers. You know, a lot of parents, especially, are going to looking online for support groups and things like that. And I thought it was interesting that they included a survivor group links. So if someone did pass away from a traumatic brain injury, or, you know, eventually the caregiver ended up losing that person, there's some support for those people as well, because that's also important, especially with respite care and everything like that. So I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to message me about it, and I'm sure Natalie will put up her link too. Thanks. Bye.